want you to look at a verse with me here in Genesis 3. Look at what happens here in verse 3 when Eve is talking to the deceiver, the devil. And mark this carefully. She says, we can eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, verse 2, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. My. That's not what God said. God said, don't eat of the fruit or you will die. Eve added to what God had said. Eve said, God said that we shouldn't eat of the tree nor touch it, lest we die. He didn't say that. God never said don't touch it. Well, yeah, but come on now, John. Eve is just adding to what God said for protection. It's the beginning of, listen, it's the beginning of, catch this, tune in. The deception began at the time when legalism began. God never said, don't touch it. But Eve, perhaps well-intended, or maybe she got that information from her husband, a phrase was added to complicate the beautiful simplicity that God gave to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden previously, when God said, enjoy everything, but don't eat of that one tree. Eve said, I can't eat that tree, and I can't touch it. That's what God told me. God didn't say that. It's the beginning of legalism. It's adding to. It makes sense, doesn't it? It seems wise to me. I understand the rationale. I get the reasoning, don't you? If you shouldn't eat of it, then why not add just another rule to make sure that it doesn't get eaten from? Let's add another rule. Let's add a little regulation. Let's include don't touch it. Now that's wisdom. But God, didn't say it. Eve could have made that choice herself, and that's fine. But she said, this is what God declared to us, that we can't eat it, nor can we touch it, and God didn't say that. Legalism begins. Wow. The conception of deception begins with legalism. Legalism. Adding religiosity, adding rules, adding conditions, adding regulations, adding. Because what happens is this. Religiosity, rules, and regulations will lead to frustration and questions and unbearable obligations, which will bring you into confusion that leads into deception, that leads into outright rebellion. It's just the opposite of what you would think. People think, mankind says, what we need is some good rules and regulations, some parameters to protect us from sin. It's always been that way. I mean, check it out. Here God would say to his people, I want you, people, Israel, to have what no other nation in the history of humanity has ever had. I want you to do what no other civilization in the history of the world has ever done. I want my people, God says, to have one day in 7 that is completely free for rest, refreshment, renewal, relationships. I want you to have a Sabbath day. Take a day off. Enjoy. And what did man do? Here God said, enjoy a holiday. I want you to do this. No one had ever done that before. No culture, civilization, or society had ever even had the idea of taking a day off. Impossible, ludicrous. And God says, trust me, I'll bless you. Just take it off. Enjoy. And what did they do with it? They did what we do. They started to say, well, we better add some rules and regulations to make sure that we keep this vacation. And they had so many rules and regulations tacked on to the Sabbath day that it became humorous. I mean, if you had a wooden leg, you had to unscrew it on the Sabbath day and take it off and put it aside, lest you be guilty of carrying a burden because your leg is wooden, and that would constitute violating the day of rest. If you had false teeth, you had to take them out because you would be carrying a burden. If you spat on the ground, that is a violation of Sabbath day because, you see, you're making clay, and clay can be used to actually build stuff with. And on and on and on. Books, volumes, libraries were written about keeping the Sabbath day. Here God says, have a kick. Enjoy. And man says, we better put some rules in place. And it got to a place where people were being destroyed. And if you've read your Bible, you know the Sabbath day problem that Jesus encountered when they were angry with him and determined to destroy him because he healed some people on the Sabbath day. That's religion. That's legalism. So what happens? People can't keep the Sabbath day regulations that man has erected. The rules and the obligations. So it leads them, kids growing up, suddenly rebel against mom and dad's religion. They rebel against the whole rules and regulations. And they say, who can do this stuff? We don't get it. And they turn away and they go into iniquity because of a religiosity, because of legalism, because God didn't say take your false teeth out. God didn't say unscrew your wooden leg. God didn't say don't spit on the ground lest you make clay. God didn't say any of that. Men did. My mom grew up in a church where, man, if you went roller skating or went bowling, your salvation was in question. It's true. Women could never wear pants or any jewelry or makeup. Legalism. People that had good ideas. How are we going to keep our people from becoming floozies? Well, we'll just say no makeup. That's what we'll do. You see, and how are we going to keep them from they smoke in bowling alleys, and how are we going to keep them away from that? We'll just, and rules tacked on, regulations built up, and pretty soon people say, forget it. Because when you start tacking on rules and regulations that God didn't say, hey, church, so much of what we look at in church traditionally is nothing more than man saying stuff that God never said, making it harder and more difficult. Now, we should be dressed up when we come to church. I mean, I do that. I mean, come on now. You need to come. Well, why? Because God's there. And He's not in your home. He's not with you when you're in the backyard or taking a shower. What are you saying? Well, it's not that. It's just that it shows respect. Says who?